Welcome everyone to the BDO and Department of Agriculture and Fisheries webinar on establishing business continuity plans for your business. Today's webinar is the first in a series of 4 that are being developed primarily to support the food and agribusiness. Today's webinar will undertake a deeper dive into the current challenges associated with the supply chain. But firstly, my name is Mark Cushing. I'm a partner in advisory at BDO in Brisbane. My primary areas of focus is around strategy and business transformation. A couple of key things that I do is strategic planning, optimizing and transforming services, but more importantly for today, I'm responsible for business continuity, disaster recovery and crisis planning, and that will be the topic of my discussion today with you guys. But with me in the room, I have Margot, who's an SME, and I'll just hand it over to Margot.
Good afternoon, everyone. My role today is to apply the food and agribusiness lens to business continuity planning. It is an industry I know well, having worked as a corporate capital and value advisor to the industry for more than 30 years. In addition to my role with BDO, I'm a non-executive director of Consolidated Pastoral Company, of Malgawi Farming, and of the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. I also own and run cattle properties in Western Queensland.
Thanks, Margot. And today's agenda, as you can see on the screen, is that we're going to have a quick look at the current state of the coronavirus. And then we're going to go into what the theme is for today, which is really about developing a response through your business continuity plans. And we'll look through a number of lenses. So we'll look at the sustainability of your business, the people in your business, and the health and safety, the technology elements, the supply chain elements. While today's webinar will focus on the supply chain for agribusiness, this will be recorded and will be sent out post the webinar. We'll also be taking questions from the audience and answering these at the end of the presentation. So feel free to submit any questions. Also, if you want to take the opportunity, you can give us feedback on what you think you need next in relation to further information or support for the business, for the agribusiness, and send these through the Q&A component as well. By now, you would have seen graphs explaining how governments around the world are putting measures in place to limit the pandemic's impact across our communities and allowing for our health system to sustainably manage the sick and give the most vulnerable in our community the best chance of survival. These measures will require businesses to develop appropriate responses, or in this case, business continuity plans, to manage and mitigate the impacts to ensure your business can survive during this period and come out the other side. We're all aware of the increasing numbers of cases and deaths due to COVID-19, both internationally and in Australia. Just this morning, on the 26th of March, 2,620 cases are currently in Australia from COVID-19. We're seeing our own government, federal and state, placing a range of restrictions on all the community to reduce the spread of this virus, which is significantly impacting the sustainability of all our businesses during this crisis. Things like, instructing people to remotely work from home, limiting travel. We're seeing these things about cross-border and international travel, the interaction, the 1.5 metre rule, and how many people you can have within certain square meterages, looking at our supply chain issues and communicating to our stakeholders. So today's webinar, in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, is intended to provide you with some practical considerations to help you prepare and put measures in place to respond to COVID-19. Post this session, we will send a copy of the webinar recording to all participants and make additional resources available via a dedicated COVID-19 webpage which has been established. Now, Margot, at a high level, what are you seeing in the industry around current state?
What we're seeing in the food and agribusiness industry is an industry working really well together. Individuals are playing their part, as our Prime Minister has asked us to do. The Anzac spirit in terms of collaboration and mateship is very much alive and well. Another positive is that the demand and supply from China is picking up. Goods are going in and we're getting critical goods that we need coming out of China. However, businesses are on edge. It's not surprising given that we're in uncharted waters and the situation is very fluid. Some businesses are well prepared in terms of having prepared a business continuity plan prior to COVID-19. Others are very much acting on the run. The focus of businesses we're seeing at this stage is very much about short-term response. Plans need to be adapted given that the situation is changing daily. We expect this to continue until the situation stabilises somewhat and people are then able to consider recovery and thrive stages of a business continuity plan.
Thanks, Margot. So our focus today is around business continuity planning. And as you can see on the screen there, there's some key components that should be considered when developing a business continuity plan. And these are as follow. Sustainability. This is where you need to understand what your critical services are and how you can continue to deliver these in an alternative way during a pandemic period. People. This is where you need to identify and communicate with your critical people in the business and developing plans to ensure they continue to work and deliver your critical services. You'll hear me talk about critical services today, and I'll be talking a little bit more as we speak through the webinar. Health and safety, developing a plan to ensure you provide your people with a safe working environment, meeting current and emerging government directions. And as you can see from all the media and attention, that these are changing on a daily basis. Your technology, utilisation of technology to maintain communication, the collaboration, the information security elements, the productivity during a pandemic period will be essential to deliver your services. And lastly, the supply chain, which we're going to do a deeper dive on during the webinar today, but this is where you need to identify the vulnerabilities and the supply chain impacts on your business and look at alternative ways to ensure you can mitigate these risks. Now we'll start to take a bit of a deeper dive into each element of that business continuity plan. The first one that we spoke about was sustainability. So when we're looking at maintaining the sustainability of a business, there are 4 important areas to address in relation to your operational, financial and reputational risks on your organisation that can occur during a pandemic. So the 4 important areas are, firstly, your critical teams. So these are the teams that perform a critical function, and without them, your business cannot survive. Business continuity planning needs to consider what actions you're going to take to protect them. For example, do you need to isolate them from other parts of the workforce? Do you need to split your teams into 2 or have them operate from different locations where appropriate? Your materials. Consideration needs to be given to any key material or resources outside of your cash and your people that you're going to rely on to deliver those services. A big one is financial management. This is an area that has potential to cause the most significant reputational damage to a business during the crisis. You should be considering prioritising your cash flow and prioritising a list of costs that can be potentially eliminated. Looking at taking advantage of the government stimulus and business support packages and lower interest rates that are currently on offer. Your employee remuneration. This is a key consideration that will determine how you maintain trust with your employees during the crisis. Where possible, you need to focus on paying employees and their benefits in a timely fashion. And keeping informed of the benefits available to you via government. For example, the payroll tax exemptions, instant asset write-offs, other stimulus packages you can take advantage of to maintain business survival during this pandemic period. And lastly, your processes. And these are broken down into 2 key areas. Firstly, you need to understand your critical operational processes to maintain business viability. You should be assessing these in relation to revenue generating and the ones that are more likely to keep your business afloat over the operational processes. A key thing to think about when you assess these is you've got to ask yourself this question. If this process stops, then it will significantly affect my business and I may never recover from it. So that's a critical service or a critical process. Secondly, you need to immediately address any administrative processes that will impact your workforce. You need to have a response plan in place to maintain confidence with your staff. You need to be able to reduce their stress and ensure you're supporting their mental well-being of the workforce during this pandemic period. The administration side of a business is often forgotten about, but it's generally the most critical in terms of your workforce. So Margot, around the agribusiness, what sort of observations and commentary can you make in particular?
Thanks, Mark. A couple of comments. In terms of critical teams, what we're seeing in the food and agribusiness industry is the establishment of well-defined command centres that are meeting every day, 7 days a week. The command centres are empowered through delegations and communication. There is a system to ensure backup team members are kept up to date. To preserve cash, we're seeing only critical activity being undertaken. This also serves to reduce the number of people on site. Research and development is being put on hold. Capital expenditure is being cut back. People are running different scenarios and speaking to their banks early. Businesses with next to no debt have drawn down on banking facilities just to make sure they have cash.
Thanks, Margot. One of the really important components of a business continuity plan is about understanding who are the right people you need in the right place at the right time and making sure that they are doing the right things. The first step is for you to understand your critical services. These are the things you do that are most critical to the business. Think of all your services, then categorize them into either critical or non-critical services. Secondly, then identify the people or teams of people that you require to deliver those critical services across the business. And thirdly, identify the critical roles within those teams or people, as they're going to be hard to replace if they get sick or they leave the organisation. You could probably think about these people as a queen on the chessboard, and if they go down, your business is in trouble. So doing these three things around your people quickly will give you a view of your minimum workforce to deliver your most critical services. And once you understand your critical services who deliver those and what roles are needed to deliver those services, you should then think about undertaking some scenario planning. And scenario plans should identify any risks to maintaining those critical roles and all those critical people, especially with the real possibility that you're going to have reduced staffing levels due to COVID-19. So think about having some backup plans in place for critical people and those roles. Think about the training needs and time to train others to support those critical roles and people. And what's a really important thing, I guess, as the leader within your organisation is that you lead and manage an organisation through a crisis can be improved through a number of ways. But I've put together 3 simple things that leaders can be focusing on as they're leading through the crisis. So the first one is be honest. Be honest with staff on the likely impacts and the administrative burden of key areas of your business, like leave and pay, which will be essential to maintaining trust and loyalty and reducing staff levels on the workforce. Reducing the stress levels on the workforce. Your communication. Communication is the most critical aspect of leading through a crisis. Keeping your employees informed throughout the process is essential to maintaining team unity. Being composed, showing empathy when managing people in times of uncertainty is key to maintaining their trust. And thirdly, empowering your staff. Make your staff part of your business decision-making process during the crisis and listen to their combined experience on how they may have some ideas to help you navigate the business through this challenging period as a leader. There will be increased anxiety levels in the workforce. We have no doubt about that. So have a think about what support you're providing your staff during this time. Margot, you're closest to the industry. What are your observations and commentary around people at the moment?
Well, in addition to the points that you've made, Mark, what we're observing as the key factors that sets food and agribusiness apart in managing them in the current environment are two factors. Mission first, a company being really clear on what their objectives are for this environment. And the second is speed over elegance.
Thanks for that, Margot. So another really important component for a business continuity plan is to address the health and safety. So your primary concern should be on the health and safety of your employees and your customers. This should also extend to the home environment or in remote locations where staff are working. Some key health and safety considerations for COVID-19 or in any business continuity plan are have a clear plan and internal communications in place to deal with staff who are describing any signs or symptoms of COVID-19. You should have a plan on what to do if and when a staff member turns up to work sick. your travel policies. And while some of these have been set up by government recently around cross-border and international travel, consider the travel that's happening within your own community and how you're operating and transporting the goods and services that you're delivering. Have a clear understanding of your workplace health and safety requirements for a safe work environment, home, or in remote locations where you traditionally wouldn't work, and communicate those to your staff. Identify any insurances or potential employer liabilities associated with undertaking work in these non-traditional ways of working, like for home. And work up plans to deal with visitors, customers accessing your business and your services, and have a position on your biosecurity plans for the business. Also look to identify non-essential work on site and determine best how technology can support these where appropriate. And finally, keep in touch with your people. Try to remain calm, be honest, and considered in your decision-making over the coming weeks and months until the virus is under control in our community. Margot, what's some of the health and safety issues, I guess, that you think the agribusiness would be more focused on?
Well, Mark, the situation we find ourselves in is first and foremost a health crisis. It's therefore important as part of our BCP, of your BCP, that you have a very clear COVID-19 health and safety policy. From reviewing the policies from some of our major food and agribusiness companies, there are two key elements to those policies. The first element is around how to minimise the risk of the virus being introduced to the facility. And this addresses things like controlling the entry and exit points, temperature checking all people entering the site, no entry for recent overseas international travellers or ill persons, only critical visitors and contractors allowed to enter the site. The second element to these policies are around how to reduce the impact when a positive coronavirus case occurs. And these are reinforcing facility pre-operational and operational sanitation, employing more supervision and monitoring of personal hygiene procedures, making arrangement that people are not with more than not to be within 1.5 metres of one another for more than 15 minutes. And this is involving splitting teams, staggering breaks, and even slowing down the production line in order to achieve this. It's also about allowing employees to have access to all the PPE they need and to replace that more frequently. And training up of replacement people for key people. So if one of those key people gets taken out, there's others that can stand in their place. In terms of the industry, advantage that it does have is it is generally a very controlled work environment, and the sanitation and hygiene practices are of a very high standard. However, the industry is being proactive and stepping up these measures. There are, however, key issues that are yet to be resolved, and these need to be resolved as a matter of priority. The first is that people that are testing negative are still being required to self-quarantine for 14 days. And the other is around the definition of a room or who needs to self-quarantine. In terms of the definition of the room, the current arrangements are that if you're in a room with someone that tests positive for more than 2 hours, then you're required to self-quarantine. Now, this is obviously a big issue when we're talking about our major processing facilities and our packing facilities.
Thanks, Margot. Another really key element in your business continuity planning is around technology. Technology will be a critical enabler to allow you to communicate, collaborate, and continue business operations remotely where appropriate. However, during this time, Increased cyber threats are more likely as businesses take advantage of employees working remotely or from home. And working remotely makes your business more vulnerable to these information security breaches or potentially intellectual property being stolen from your business. So we've put together sort of 6 key areas of technology from a BCP perspective that you should consider as you develop out your continuity plans. So the first one is about alerts. You need to ensure all staff, customers, stakeholders in your business are well informed and that you use a variety of channels to get your message out. For example, use of SMS, websites, social media, emails, collaboration platforms, things like this webinar today. And so be prepared to use multiple technologies to deliver your messages. The next one is about remote working. Ensure you have considered the security considerations around using technology to support a remote working environment for staff, whether that's in a different location that you traditionally haven't worked or in your home environment. You may want to consider where technology should play a role to also augment and where technology can play a role to augment or sort of support human-related work. The connectivity and bandwidth. Work locations are generally designed to support the workforce and in these locations. So consideration should be given to how they connect across the network from a home or another remote location where you traditionally haven't worked. And once again, the security implications need to be addressed when you're using consumer grade technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when you get to the BYOD piece. Collaboration. When collaborating, you need to ensure employees have the required technology to collaborate. You need to ensure your employees are trained to use that technology. Employees also need to have access to information remotely to perform their duties. So it could be on file shares or something else on your network. And consider the possibilities of shared collaboration with other businesses in your area who have similar business processes to you. The 5th one is about single points of failure. Just relying on one communication channel, for example, email, for communicating and file sharing and collaborating could be a real issue if email fails. So due to increased demand of that technology, look at diversifying your technology channels to avoid those single points of failure. There are a number of technology platforms where you can communicate and not use just email. And lastly, the bring your own device, allowing unknown devices on your network and your systems. These and other applications introduces risk to the business. You need to consider who and how employees get access to sensitive information and personally identifiable information from their own devices. There are serious liabilities under the Privacy Act and general data protection laws you need to be adhering to. So Margot, any commentary from the agribusiness around technology elements?
Yeah, sure, Mark. We're not seeing technology in the current environment as being a major concern for the food and agribusiness industry. Technology for a single farm in the short term is not a critical function. However, the points Mark has raised are as important for a major food and agribusiness company to consider as they are for any other business.
Okay, I'm going to quickly go through, I guess, from a BCP perspective around supply chain and what we would like to see addressed in a BCP perspective. And then I'm going to hand over to Margot to do a deeper dive on supply chain, which is a stronger focus for today's webinar. So you should be identifying your key and direct suppliers and understand their ability to meet supply requirements. Gaining visibility on your supplier, inventory, and ability to perform purchase orders. Working with suppliers to understand their flexibility to shift supply locations if need be, and understand where you sit from an allocation perspective in the event of any supply shortages. Think about potential alternative supply sources, especially for critical inventory. Consider increasing supply to improve stock management if closures occur. Have a contingency plan in place for alternate supplies if they have not fared well during a crisis. The likelihood of COVID-19 causing an impact on supply chain is guaranteed. We recommend that you focus on 4 key areas. Your production. Production, if supply is limited, determine how long you can continue with your current materials. Can you prioritise production to limit impacts? You may need to determine your break-even production point and manage future supplies to a reduced rate of production. Your second one is your cash. Determine what cash reserves are required to support the business if supply is reduced. Cash reserves will become significant for maintaining ongoing business expenses with reduced operational outputs. Monitor the state and federal government announcements for the business support packages and incentives to keep your business afloat during the pandemic. Labour. Determine the impact a reduced operational output will have on the workforce and how you best manage staff to maintain reliability, reputation, and your brand. Alternatively, if operations require the supply of labour, then how can that supply be maintained if transport, per se, is impacted or labour is unable to be accessed? The supply and demand element, start to identify means of providing critical supply and demand functions. It will be important to clearly communicate to customers and business partners any likely delays and the measures that you've put in place. This communication is important for you to maintain your brand and reputation of your business. Margot will now be taking us through the current supply challenges being addressed in the food and agribusiness.
When you think about food and an agribusiness industry, their supply chains are extremely complex. Indeed, when you stop and map them out, it seems like it's almost the majority of the economy. If I can just use the chicken meat industry as an example, it's not just hatcheries, breeding farms, rearing farms, processing plants, distributors, retail and food service, but it's also transport, critical to a time-sensitive supply chain, hundreds of truck movements a week at feed mills, chemical supplies, inputs into the production of feed grains, 3 different blends covering birth to processing, veterinary products, specialist cleaning service, laundry services, specialised gases, packaging, energy, water, waste disposal, specialist contractors, communication services. In looking at your supply chain in a BCP context, you need to look at all components of the supply chain and look at the inputs into the inputs. We'd just like to highlight some of the current challenges that the industry is facing. And I emphasise the word current because hopefully many of these are solved quickly, but the expectation there will be, once these are solved, there will be a new set of challenges. The first one is around the definition of ag as an essential service. What's in and what's out. This is being worked on. Border closures. When they were first announced, there was concern around this being able to access skilled people. We know freight, there's not a question, but just whether we can get the systems in place in a timely manner for the industry to be able to access the skilled people that it needs. People in the supply chain, and it does keep coming back to people. As I've already said, we need clarity from Queensland Health on how a positive coronavirus case is to be managed. And there is acceptance in the industry that it's not if, it is when. Closure of our international borders and now the closure of our state border means there's not the normal turnover in backpackers. The extension of visas for the international backpackers has been addressed. Proactive steps are being taken to reduce the density of accommodation for backpackers. There's also thought being given to how we isolate infected workers, particularly again backpackers. Mundubba, as an example, has come up with this solution of looking to use its showgrounds for this purpose. There's also a strong desire within the industry to tap into workers displaced from the airline, hospitality and tourism industry. In terms of our challenges, our current challenges, air freight is a big one, especially for our high-end products that have been going out under the passenger planes. There's now limited supply and it's at a high cost. The industry is looking at the viability of chartered cargo planes. Another challenge that is coming up is access to the required number of refrigerated containers. The food and ag industry relies on imported containers for its export containers. There may be a need to import empty containers for export. There's the potential for various imports to be in short supply. A big one that's come up that's particularly important for the chicken and pork industry is CO2 gas. And there's a sentiment in the industry that we need to take action now to prioritise access to these essential gases. Hand sanitisers, PPE, and even the dispensing containers for hand sanitisers has been an issue. Hopefully the opening up of China will alleviate some of these blockages. But new ones will keep popping up. I mean, this morning I had an email regarding the shortage of cattle NILS tags, and as people know, that's a requirement to be able to sell livestock. There's also a concern around spare parts within the industry, with people maintaining higher stock levels than normal. Then this is emerging as an issue. The other challenge for all of us is collaboration across the supply chain. What can we do to help one another? Companies helping their customers, their suppliers, their contractors. Two examples. Supermarkets relaxing their products specification in this environment. Another simple one is just having standard protocols for interaction with contractors.
Thanks, Margot. Look, we're now at the part of the webinar where we're going to take questions to answer. But before I begin, I just want to ask that that you guys focus on keeping your people safe. Make sure you collaborate and try your best to innovate. And that means try some things that may be outside your comfort zone. We know that people are anxious, but the government and there's other resources are available to support you through these uncertain times. And just in relation to, I want to share some information around the Queensland Government's Department of Agriculture and Fisheries has a number of working groups that are focused on COVID-19 responses. One of the working groups is a workforce availability working group, and it's looking at issues such as extending visas of working holiday makers already in Australia, allowing seasonal workers to remain in Australia, and other supply and demand issues. The next government working group for Department of Agriculture and Fisheries is the workplace health and safety area, and that's really focusing on ensuring employees have guidelines to follow for workplace safety, ensuring employees have guidelines to follow for workplace safety as well. Business continuity working group, looking at continuity issues, and which we've obviously partnered today to develop this business continuity webinar. And the other one is supply chain and logistics. Identify critically vulnerable points for the food supply chain, and they're looking at development of resolution and action to avoid disruption. So there are a number of key working groups that the government has got, which is focusing on the agribusiness to address those four areas. And I guess more information will follow in the coming days and weeks as things come out of those working groups as that progresses. Now I'm going to move to the question and answers. We've had a fair few questions come through. There's more for Margot than me, but that's okay. I don't feel bad about that. So the first one's from Sandra from Queensland, and this is for you, Margot. Can we test temperatures of backpacker employees with touchless thermometers? And what happens if a backpacker is infected at a hostel?
No, thanks, Mark. No, I'm not an expert in employment agreement, but based on the number of workplaces that I know of that are doing temperature testing, my answer is yes. I suggest, however, that you may like to check with your industry body to access their employment expertise. AgForce, for one, has this available. We'd also suggest that you take steps to implement this as part of your health and safety policies, i.e. what workers' temperatures are to be taken and the symptoms checked before work commences on site. If temperature's higher than 38 degrees, or you've had a cough, sore throat, or shortness of breath, the worker is not fit for work and must isolate immediately and seek medical advice. Make sure you keep records of these checks so that they can be provided to health authorities if needed.
Okay, thanks for that, Margot. Good practical advice for Sandra there. There's another question here from Leanne, also from Queensland. There's a few Queensland ones today. Yep. If steps have to be taken to segregate groups of employees in a pack house and an employee tests positive to coronavirus, do all employees have to self-isolate or only the group that have been working together?
Now, if I wanted to pick one single challenge that the industry needs to address, it's around this. If a worker is confirmed to have COVID-19, then you need to call 13 Health, 13 43 25 84, 1343 2584 for advice. Currently, the guidelines are, as we understand it, and have been told by an industry, by a company that has had a positive case, if you've been in a room for 2 hours with someone that tests positive, then they need to self-isolate. Work, as I said, is being done on defining the room, so there can be parts of a room in the case of a pack house or a boning room, for example.
Okay, thanks for that, Margot. Another question's come through. Marsha from Queensland. How do we define or demonstrate essential service with respect to food supply chain participants?
From the Prime Minister's address to the nation on Tuesday night, where he also called on all of us to do our bit, it's clear that he's seeking to keep all people with a current job classified as an essential worker. All materials that we have seen from Queensland Government suggest that they are very conscious and undertaking effort to make sure that the agricultural supply chain are not impacted by shutdowns.
Okay, thanks. It's got a dual question here. They must have been similar, so the guys have combined them together. It's from Wayne in Queensland and Stuart in Victoria, and both have asked pretty similar questions around the agriculture food chain and what steps are being taken to make sure all components of that supply chain remain open, including borders.
A similar question to Marsha. The federal government has agricultural coordinating committees, and the Queensland government also has an ag coordinating committee with various subcommittees. Issues like what constitute the food and ag industry are being defined as an essential service is being proactively addressed. Regarding borders, check Queensland Government's website for updates, but information released indicates borders remain open for all freight and logistics.
Okay, another one here from Robin in Queensland. Is it possible to take delivery of farming equipment purchased interstate?
As per the previous questions, and as per the government website, the borders remain open for freight and logistics.
Cool. Lee from Queensland. Will my trip to town to post orders to be considered an essential service? Will the postal service continue to work? Will customers be able to collect orders?
At this stage, these services remain open. Monitor media and government announcements for further updates.
Okay. Vanessa from Queensland wants to know what measures are being put in place to ensure the supply chain of beef will keep going, particularly in relation to the big beef processing plants.
I spoke during the webinar about the number of measures being taken by our food processing and packaging industry to reduce the risk of a coronavirus case in the workplace. What is being worked on as a matter of priority at this point in time is how to limit the impact when, and I say when again, when someone tests positive.
Okay, here's another question here from John in Queensland. Will the government guarantee payment for produce delivered to market?
Government has a number of measures available to assist businesses. I'm not familiar with any to directly guarantee payments to suppliers. However, the government assistance measures and the banking support are designed to keep businesses operating as much as possible and to keep people in work, which should generally reduce counterparty risks than would otherwise be the case. This needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, question come through from David from Queensland. What help is available to help retain staff?
There are a number of government assistance packages available. You are able to find the summary by going to the BDO website.
Okay, cool. Mia from Queensland. We run an annual agricultural show. With agriculture shows being cancelled all over Australia, we will need a plan for if events will be hosted later this year. But we are also conscious of not putting too much pressure on farmers to get their stock ready for prime showing conditions. Do you have any advice?
The general view at this point is that restrictions may continue for 6 months. People, however, are finding alternative solutions, e.g. some of the studs have already moved their sales to be 100% online.
Okay, so Will from Queensland, securing access to road and rail freight in an environment of increasing demand due to possible reductions of skilled drivers may lead to possible price gouging by freight companies as they may not have a return leg load. Any advice on how we can mitigate this risk?
We're not seeing price gouging by road and freight companies at this point. Truck drivers are already being required to remain in their trucks when collecting and delivering goods. Paperwork is being passed through the windows in plastic. There's also work being done to allow people to keep working where they are working in an isolated environment, be it truck drivers, harvesters.
Okay, thanks, Margot. Here's a question that 2 people have asked, George and Leon, both from Queensland. Will we still be able to buy and sell livestock, for example, cattle, sheep, goats?
Well, at this point in time, the Roma sale yards, and that's our biggest, at least cattle supply centre, is still operating. However, it's only open to essential people to attend. If you don't really need to be there, then you're going to be asked to leave. I did note, though, in Beef Central yesterday that Victoria has closed some of its sale yards. But the likes of Roma, I would think, given it's important, there will be a lot of pressure to keep it operating in this environment.
Okay, cool. Jonathan from Victoria. It's good to have a Victorian online. Will export currently significantly be reduced and local demand for seafood still being strong, but supply channels are getting clogged? What new innovative and adaptive measures can we consider across the industries to supply food to all our Australians?
The Australian seafood industry is really challenged by the lack of supply of air freight. However, the industry is proactively looking at the viability of chartering cargo planes.
Okay, cool. And Christopher from Victoria must be close to Jonathan. I have orders to markets other than China, for example, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, and South Korea that I cannot fill due to cancelled flights. What can be done to access these markets?
I'm not sure from your question as to what products you're looking to air freight. The seafood industry, as I said, is looking at chartering cargo planes and will be looking for other food products to take space on these planes. The beef industry the Australian beef industry has a competitive advantage due to its long shelf life. It's 120 days, which gives us time to get product to market via ships.
Okay, well, there's a question that's coming from me, and I feel like I need to answer one, so this is all good. I've got a question here from Jean. Jean says, we ran a mock business continuity plan activity and it led to actions that were immediate or short-term in nature. What tools can I recommend to see? What tools can we recommend to see what actions have worked over the longer term and to identify what needs improving? That's a good question, Jean. Look, I think my recommendation would be to make sure that you're documenting your responses and taking a formal record of those things that you've been doing. We're obviously in a challenging environment, and as things happen, we'll forget every action and strategy that we've taken in place. So a simple thing that you could do is take an event log of the actions and who the person was responsible for that, the date, the time, and this will give you a bit of a framework to reflect upon over time and update of any subsequent actions that you may need to take. I've got another question here, and I think it might be the last one, and that's from Andrew. I'm not sure where Andrew is, but Andrew's question is, this is a bit of a bigger picture question, but what is your sense of the proportion of industries or businesses that would already have had business continuity plans in place? Is it the majority or the minority? That's a good question, Andrew. And look, from our perspective, we're seeing that business continuity planning is in place generally across all the industry, but the depth, I guess, of the thought and planning that's gone into those business continuity plans probably are a little bit weak. I guess the nature of the COVID-19 pandemic and the duration of these impacts versus what you would normally see in a short-term event like a flood or a fire. So BCPs or business continuity plans are really in place for those shorter disasters around flood and fire, but due to the nature of the pandemic, it's a longer term thing. So I guess, okay, so I think we had a couple of technical difficulties. That's what always happens when you do a live webinar, but to answer the last of Andrew's question, to answer your question, we're seeing planning, but people are also working hard to reconsider these plans. Look, that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you for your attendance. Please contact Margot or I if we can assist you or your organisation in relation to your BCP responses. BDO is going to provide a copy of this webinar shortly, and we'll add it to any other resources or responses to the questions for the BDO coronavirus webpage in the coming days. Now, additional webinars, as I said at the start, are being planned over the coming weeks, and these will be tailored to themes and issues as they arise. So your feedback's going to be important to help guide what you would like to hear from next in this webinar series. But on behalf of the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and BDO, we thank you for your time to attend today's webinar. Stay safe.